my peeps, and welcome back to Passionate People and Preposterous Peeves. I'm your host, Ike, and before I get two more, I don't know what, I'd like to just take a moment and say thanks for being here and giving this pod a listen. It means a lot to me that you chose to use your precious time and give me and my guest your ears. Now, after all of this awesomeness, if you still have the wherewithal, it'd be really cool if you shared this with someone who you think would like it. Or just subscribe yourself if you already haven't. That'd mean a lot. So if I sound a little under the weather, it might be because I've got the most stutter start of coughs going on. Very much just putts every now and then and just fuck all, other than be mild annoying. This is brought up about an interesting question that I'm curious to, get y'all's feedback on. At what point does a cough become problematic in the post-COVID times where you no longer go out, you no longer go to things? Where is your break line? Because if you once every 6 hours, you go out for sure, right? That's nothing. That doesn't constitute anything. But if it's every 3 hours, do you go out? Let me know at twitter.com/likeikes or passionandpeevespodcast@gmail.com. What is the episode number we are on? We are on episode 4. This is season 3, episode 4. And this one is a doozy. But before we get to that, got a little bit of fun me news. I come to you after the fantastic finals appearance in a local team tournament with my boys and previous guests Kyler Martin and Dan Silver. We split the prize. I'll see if I can find and tag a team picture we took at the event. It was a lot of fun. Lots of awesomeness was had, and then a delicious dining experience at The Kettle in Manhattan Beach. It was dope all the way around. Sadly, what is not dope in my world, I mean, it's not dope, but it's not as dope as other things, is I am going back to work 2 days after this podcast is released. Poop! I wish I could stay on vacation forever. Or that's what I'd want anyway. I don't know if that's what I need. I think actually going back to work will be good for my overall brain space. My cabeza will be calmer. Anyway, back to the episode at hand. This episode is amazing and has been literally years in the making. This is one of the first guests I reached out to. This is a great and dear friend of mine, one B. Hickey. I'm sure you will enjoy the episode, but a little bit about behind the scenes. So this podcast started out for one of two reasons. One, I was really depressed. I was alone. I'd always kind of wanted to do a podcast, and I just really needed to talk to people. I was living alone, working graveyard shift, new in Los Angeles. There was nowhere for me to go, nothing for me to do, and I was kind of freaking out. And, I'd watched some video essay or somebody's, inspirational video on YouTube somewhere. I don't remember if it was the toolbox dilemma wherein you think you need to get all the gets and gadgets, or if it was kind of imposter syndrome, like who am I to do such a thing as start a podcast? Who would want to listen to me? So that was one aspect of it, of why it kind of came about. And, I was able to break through that because of the need of that imposter syndrome, that toolbox fallacy kind of thing. And the other was, I really love listening to people that are just about something. And one of my longest lasting memories and best examples of that is my guest today, B. Hickey, who and I talk about this towards the end, but I got to talk about it now because I love telling the story. There was a tournament we went to aeons ago, where now everybody in the car has been on the podcast. It was myself, Daniel Mabey, Max Millickman, and B. Hickey. We go down to the tournament. I don't do so good. I don't remember if B does good. Max almost top 8s, Dan top 8s. Afterwards, we're driving back to Sonoma County from San Jose. About a 2-hour drive. Not too long into the drive, we end up on this tale being spun to us by B about the history of Magic. And it's not meaningful. We're not getting anything important out of it as tournament players, but it was so captivating that the whole entire drive home, like the time when it finally stopped, is about when we reached his place in Petaluma. So that's at minimum an hour 30, hour 20. I don't remember him taking a pause, a break, a time for question, anything like that. And it wasn't because he was crowding the space and we're like, oh, that's a weirdo. We were all, you could feel the energy of the car just entranced. To the point that when he got out of the car, there was a void. And instead, not a, geez, finally this guy's out here. It was, well, what do we talk about now? You know, it's like going, you know, and seeing like Muller's Symphony or Beethoven or, you know, something just like grandiose. And then, you know, you just look at each other like, where from here do whence we travel? So without further ado or gilding of the lily, please enjoy this over 2 year in the making interview with B. Hickey. Take it away, past self. All right, folks. Today, my guest was a 6-year-old SAG member, certified kayak tour guide, Tamales High Castleberry Award recipient, and was once banned from the Dance Palace Summer Stock Theater troupe for excessive flatulence. It's B. Hickey!
Well, hello, friends.
How are we doing today, my fine person?
So good. You know, I actually planted a bunch of poppies this year, and the first one of them opened.
Wow. Well, other than that, what decision in your life are you the most proud of making?
Oh gosh, probably leaving the food service industry.
I believe I was there, not there, but I believe I was still around Northern California and interacted with you soon thereafter. Is that correct? This is when a knife was lobbed in your direction.
Okay, so hear me out. My job description, my job description was literally gathering groups of 20 or more adults over the age of 80, and seating them in a room with some of the like poorest quality ventilation of any building I've ever been in. It was like a cellar that they converted into an extra dining hall, but real short ceiling, right? For 3 to 4 hours at a time. And the room itself, it was so poorly ventilated that it would just through body heat naturally start to get hotter and hotter as the event. So we're all just in there sweating like fucking pigs. And that was my job description. I would guide people back there. I would tell them about the lovely time they'd have. They would never get cold. And then I would guide them out of the restaurant. And it was a pretty good ticket thing. And March 13 rolled around and I started getting cancellations, and I was paying just enough attention to the news to go like, huh. And I watched like enough private dining events on my calendar dry up to where we lost like 40 events in like a matter of 2 hours through email. And all of them, you know, citing health concerns. And our policy at the time, at my insistence, was we need to just allow these people to cancel and charge no fees of any kind. Because we don't know how long this is going to last, and it seems very serious. And the owner actually was still trying to throw a party on the 15th. He had it scheduled. I had people coming in from across the Marin to work this party for the closing of La Folie. Is actually a very famous restaurateur that owned Left Bank and owns Left Bank. Roland Passot was closing his famous San Francisco restaurant La Folie, and he wanted to have the party there, so he had all this food delivered. And then I told him about COVID and he did not believe me. And a day later, he came in with the soberest look on his face and was like, "We need to cancel." And I'd already told some of the staff, like, "Hey, you know, don't get in your car yet." But that was it. And then I came back a few times after that, and had some rather unsavory experiences with some of the like locals who recognized me. And I mean, they were nice and all, but they were mostly unmasked and trying to tell me how much of a hoax everything was. I was
of course
I was in the process of trying to take care of like 2 immunocompromised adults in my life, so it wasn't really
slightly
a good time
divergent experiences.
Yeah, very different.
In moments such as that, especially with an older generation while being in public and perhaps trying to be polite, what's your favorite G-rated curse word that you like to utter?
Oh God, fiddlesticks.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Fiddlesticks.
I
It
haven't heard
sounds
that
dirty.
so long.
It sounds
God.
dirty sometimes too. That's the thing, is that a lot of curse words, or they're these onomatopoeic like covers. They're like especially in the Bible Belt. There's a lot of cheese and crackers type replacements for
Yeah,
actual curses. And fiddlesticks, I don't think it. I'm not sure what the full etymology of the phrase is.
yeah.
But to me, it always just sounds like it sounds like tummy sticks from is that Wedding Crashers, I think, um, which is just this absurd sounding gay sex thing. So when I say fiddlesticks, part of me, like 10% of me is like, is this a filthy, am I saying something that's kind of like filthy? And then the rest of me is like, this is actually the silliest sounding thing. Like, it sounds like a game that children play with like popsicle sticks that are painted
So,
different colors.
as we are recording this locally for both of ourselves, and I am at my computer, I was able to Google this. Fiddlesticks comes from the Shakespearean times, and it was meant to be used for something that was insignificant or trivial. This is because a violin bow is regarded as inconsequential or perhaps simply basic. So it's like
Huh.
supposed to be silly or irrelevant is the, etymology and subsequent definition.
Oh, see, now I'm wondering if it has to do with like unstrung bowstrings that get used for like practicing on violins or something.
Hey,
Ooh,
yeah.
that's fascinating. Ooh, that's fascinating.
So along the same kind of lineage there, do you have a favorite myth you like to most commonly dispel?
I have so many, but there's one that really stands out, and it's Mary Poppins. So most people have been exposed to Mary Poppins, or have at least seen like a VHS or DVD cover at some point. And even as children, my generation especially, it was like a very popular Disney film to put on for parents. And there being one specific reason, and that was the duration. The film is over 3 hours long. So
Oh, holy
if you're a
crap.
parent, yeah, it's an epic. If you put on Mary Poppins, it's like as long as The Godfather, and you can go get a 3 hour nap. And my parents, like, finding the life hack that they did, actually put on Mary Poppins every day for almost an entire year of my childhood. I was like 4, and I watched Mary Poppins. I knew all the songs by heart. I had all the dance moves down. My twin and I would roll out a futon every time we'd put it on, because it was every day. And there would be a 3 hour grace period for my folks where we would just like stomp around. And it never occurred to me that the whimsical music was diluting what was essentially a very sinister plot. And yeah, I'm happy to continue divulging on this, because it's a good 4 minute rant. But
Please, yes, no, go for it.
okay, yeah. So hear me out. Mary Poppins. The opening segment, you see a handful of children who are they're misbehaving in their own home, and they're doing so in such a way that their nanny is throwing in the towel and is saying, I quit. I can't actually handle your children. They misbehave, and they're not really obedient. They're not really good children, which is the message that is an under running theme. As you'll see, they end up as chimney sweepers. The children go upstairs and they write a list that's like their perfect nanny, their ideal nanny. And they bring it downstairs, and they read the list to their parents in a sort of a sing-song way. And the father is so like swamped at the bank that he's hardly present. Really, he just hears them make these unhinged demands. They're like, we want her to be really pretty and sing us songs and give us sweeties, and she's going to be so pretty and young and beautiful, and we're tired of these old crones. And the dad is so flustered by this, he takes the letter and he tears it into little pieces and he throws it into the fire. And then you watch as the chunks of paper kind of like drift up the fire, up the chimney. Again, chimney theme here. And then you see a shadowy figure. You don't see her face, mind you. And this is classic shapeshifter work right here, because you won't see their face until they've acquired a target. And what happens is she meticulously captures this effervescence that's coming out of the chimney with her hands, and she pulls them together and reconstitutes the actual letter, and she reads the design for what these children want. And it's only then that you ever actually see her physical appearance. It's only after she's read the children's description of her that you see a pretty young woman. But before then, she's a shadowy underbeing of some kind. I don't know, because the next thing that she does, and the whimsical music kind of tears this away. A lot of people just lose this in the moment; they forget. The next thing that she does is she sucks like 12 nannies into a vortex, obliterates them. They're waiting in line outside the house the next morning, answering a personal ad for the new nanny, because the kids still need a new nanny, even if they have these unhinged demands about her. And then the indoor housekeeper opens the door. She looks out. She sees there's a line of nanny. She closes the door. And then Mary Poppins strikes, and she sucks these women using chaos magic of some kind. She sucks them into a vortex, probably the same magic that's used to make her bag of holding, which she's got a carpet bag that's essentially, any witch has this, right? And instead of a broom, she has an umbrella that allows her to fly or float or sort of drift down gently, as you might imagine. But she's then outside the door. They're gone. They get sucked away. You never hear from them again. They're kind of the Barb of this story, really. All of them in many ways, like from Stranger Things. And and so she ends up actually doing the interview. And when she presents the letter all meticulously taped up, the dad has a full-on meltdown. And is rendered speechless. He can't even protest that she's got the letter, and she's like, "No, I fill out the qualifications for the ad you put out." And he's like, "Well, I did put it in the chimney, and it did float up there, so this makes sense, right? Like an ash demon could have got it, but whatever." So she then proceeds to feed the children bitter medicine from a spoon, and then takes them to the park where they start to hallucinate. And as she and this vagabond that's her close friend, a really nice troubadour, the Berthold, if you will, they kind of have this magical adventure while the children are tripping out, and then they go to a flop house afterwards to kind of recover, so that the parents don't suspect what they've done. They've dosed these kids. And at the flop house, they meet people who are like literally so high that they're upside down sitting on the ceiling taking tea up there and like laughing, like truly a madhouse. And then the end result of the film is sort of I'm not really sure what the point of Let's Go Fly a Kite is, except to kind of gaslight the audience, because the children do end up as child laborers in the chimneys, and that's kind of the end result is all these adults dancing around like, we're chimney sweepers now because we didn't follow the rules or whatever, but really they were waylaid by this ash demon. And I'll tell that to anyone who mentions Mary Poppins, and sometimes it's a kind of an unhinged rant because I know I don't have much time, so I start to synopsize and shorten things up, and it's just the shorter it gets, the more bewildering it is. But like the more you shorten it, the more you synopsize the actual plot of Mary Poppins, the more it seems like a Guillermo del Toro, like Tim Burton-esque, like gothic noir film that deserves a retelling in a much more sinister light. Like
that's
the
a
Mary
fun
Poppins,
alt take, yeah.
The sequel with Lin-Manuel and Emily Blunt was delightful and definitely for kids, but like I really think that we could have had a Tim Burton led.
We could have like a
version.
PG-13 R-rated, yeah.
Just something that acknowledges for once that she's fucking creepy as fuck. Beautiful though, beautiful singing voice. I mean, you love her, but like that's part of the magic of it, is that there's this music going on that's emotionally manipulating you the whole time. And that's the first time as a child I was aware of this. I started to become aware as a child that something sinister was happening. And so Let's Go Fly a Kite has a whole different meaning. And what makes matters worse is that because of our interest in Mary Poppins, we didn't really know anything else to recommend for bedtime music. So our parents actually got the Mary Poppins soundtrack and played that in our bedroom, my twin in my bedroom at night, to play us out, to set us down at night. So we would often lie there I would lay there with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, listening to the whole soundtrack again, start to finish, just thinking about her and how you don't really see her face until she reads the letter.
Curious. Well, on the inverse of this, what's the silliest thing you believed as a child that you look back on and giggle? Sans religious ideologies.
Ooh. Well, let me consult my notes. Oh yeah. So this actually stems from a book that was turned into a made-for-television series that was my go-to, one of the go-to films to put on when I had to stay home from school when I was sick. And that's a film called My Family and Other Animals. And essentially it's just this little slice of life flick about a relatively wealthy British family that vacations in an area that's got a lot of wildlife, and it more or less follows the story of like the family and their own internal drama, but mostly it follows this kid, and this kid just goes around this island and interacts with all the animals there. And for me, that was like heaven. Like I was a huge David Attenborough nut starting at like 5. And my one of my special interests has always been like nature, in like a big way.
Can confirm.
So getting to put this like movie on was great. Except that in the movie, there's a character who convinces the main character that earwigs, otherwise known as vine borers, or if you want to get Latin, Hymenoptera dermoptera, which literally means skin wing. You know, they have wings. That earwigs would actually try to get in my ears if I wasn't careful, if I fell asleep under a tree or in like a field. And even though in the movie that plot is kind of dispelled, you actually I couldn't really comprehend what the adults were talking about. I was mostly just aware of the kids' behavior, which was to get revenge for the lie, but it didn't really register to me that they could be called earwigs and not have that function. So like for a long time I was not just cautious around earwigs, but I would warn others.
It was your quicksand.
With like the grim determination of like a shell-shocked war veteran on a plane, like to the jittery pre-puking recruits surrounding me. Like, yeah, I thought that I was doing noble work, and I was actually quite wrong. They're wonderful little creatures if you get to know them. They actually have origami-like wings that are so sophisticated that that the Japanese now use the basic like planning of their wings in robotics. And their wings fold up in a way that's almost Leonardian, like it's or Da Vincian. It's really beautiful to see, and they're also like rainbow colored. But they're one of the only insects that has wings that are more or less made of skin.
Wild.
Yeah.
If you had the opportunity to make a meal just for yourself, what would be your favorite one to just sit down? Assuming you don't have to do the dishes afterwards. Time is infinite. You know, you're in the Dragon Ball Z hyperbolic time chamber. You have everything and all the time in the world to make it. What meal are you gonna make just for you?
Gosh, how much time you got? There's one meal that I treat myself to because it's usually kind of like the more expensive cut you'll find in a market. And it's often like an impulse thing where I'm like, I want to treat myself, or I'm trying to serve a carnivore something delightful. It's a filet mignon. And there's so many different ways to do it, and it's so difficult to mess up a good filet mignon. And usually I'll accompany that with some kind of bitter green, or haricot vert's a great option. Sometimes sautéed mushrooms are like the choice. Almost always potatoes. Like probably the best way to go about it is picking the right fillets. Like because I'd be doing two usually. Like if I did one for myself, then it wouldn't really matter. But I like to find two cuts that are roughly the same size, and a lot of butcher shops will try to pair them and like they're similar sizes around their display. And once you get a good one, you kind of want to like puck it up so it's really just like this little trunk, almost like an oversized scallop. And I mean the trick is getting a sear down that is perfunctory. So you kind of got to start it on a high heat and get the flip over, but you can do it with a butter sauce. Like you can get the sear going on one side, and then when you flip it, you can toss in some aromatics like garlic and rosemary or oregano or something like that, and just a healthy dollop of butter, and just spoon feed that over the top of the sear while the bottom gets cut. And then I'll turn the oven on at a certain point because I'm doing potatoes like all day. I like to overcook potatoes because they mash a little easier that way. And if you're doing a flavor-based mash and you want the filet mignon to taste good and not like soil, then you definitely want to like cut the potatoes and soak them in water and drain them a little bit, get some of the starch out, so that when you fluff them up with like milk or something, they're real creamy. There's a lot of ways you can go about that too, like a little bit cream cheese. Butter's just a great choice. Sometimes using actual like blue cheese is a really good hack for getting some extra fat in the potatoes, but like that has a nice little crisp bite to it. And then you finish the steak. Actually, after you get a good sear on both sides, you actually plop that guy in the oven, like, or those steaks or whatever, on the rack with the potatoes, kind of as they're finishing. And it doesn't need to be that hot, like 300 degrees of indirect heat would probably do it, and just like another 10 to 12 minutes or so. What happens is you get a nice good sear on the outside, but the inside actually converts to like a perfect medium rare, usually in about that time interval, and you don't really have to test it. You can just kind of guess that a sear on two sides and 10 to 12 minutes at a relatively high temperature will be enough indirect heat, because when you pull it out, it's going to rest and keep cooking. And then when you cut into it, it's like this beautiful pink color all the way through and just absolutely melts in your mouth.
Love it. On the kind of inverse of that, in a very bizarre way, if you were to take part in a WWF styled event, what would you want your walkout song to be?
I have thought so little about this. People, I know there's people out there. I know there's people out there.
I love the reckless honesty. I'm just like, I haven't thought about this at all. Not oops, not sorry. Yeah. I just haven't thought about this.
Like in my life, you know, like there's always there's a general curiosity in the household, like when we're watching the Giants play baseball and some rookie comes up and we're excited about them, and then we hear their walkout music and it's like, oh, that's all right, I know that song. You know, there's so many Bay Area natives that play on the team now, so hearing some like Bay Area rap and slaps is pretty cool. But for myself, I hadn't really even thought about it until I read your question. But I actually, there is one thing that does spring to mind, and it's mostly because if I did do a professional wrestling style event, I would be leaning very heavily on the camp aspect of wrestling. And so in that vein, I would almost certainly choose Flight of the Bumblebee by Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. That's the one. And it is kind of perfect walkout music for me, if you think about it.
I think about it a lot.
Yeah, I definitely would be entering with the same intense vibration as that song elicits in the body, and it's one I've been listening to since I was very small, so I'm very comfortable losing my mind to it and getting into character, or the character of like a little bee.
What's the best or most memorable piece of advice you ever got?
Yeah, actually the most memorable, and this is a tough one because again, it's from a movie.
As all good things come from.
Yeah, like best advice, it's hard to quantify. I'm still living that out. But the most memorable advice has got to be avoid the clap, Jimmy Dugan. I watched A League of Their Own a lot when I was a kid. It was one of the movies we just owned, I think.
It's a banger.
So it got put on. Yeah, I've watched it a lot of times, so I've gotten to the point now where I almost appreciate it less because it follows such a formulaic pattern of storytelling that really doesn't actually make me feel good about a lot of things, a lot of period pieces that I enjoyed back then. There's just a formulaic nature to them, just kind of like
90s movie checks out.
Yeah, 90s movies. Yeah, there's a lot of 90s movies that when I revisit them, I'm just left a little dissatisfied.
Boiler
but I understand.
plate.
I understand that there's actually a show that's even more gay, and I want to see that. I hear it's very good. Alana Glazer headlines it, and it looks fantastic. But yeah, so Tom Hanks's least likable character was one of the ones that actually got him nominated for an Oscar, I think, before Forrest Gump, and that was Jimmy Dugan in A League of Their Own, and he was such a scumbag.
Oh, he's the
piece
best
of shit, but he's so good.
Yeah, best piece of shit ever.
some of the best one-liners. Actually, some of the only reasons to watch the film are Tom Hanks's one-liners in that film.
Anybody ever tell you look like a penis in a penguin hat?
Like, oh god, there's so many. There's no crying in baseball. I mean, this is just it's essential viewing. And like for anyone who's into baseball lore, in part because of that character, and there is a scene in it where he receives a baseball from a kid to autograph, and he kind of half-assedly like writes on it and hands the ball back to the kid, and then gets on the bus, and now the bus is leaving, and the kid looks at the ball and he goes, wow, avoid the clap, Jimmy Dugan. And you just hear from the window of the bus, that's good advice, kid. It's stuck with me. And
turns
so,
out is good advice, kid.
so yeah, and I have echolalia, which is a form of stimming where I kind of just subconsciously cycle through like movie lines and song lyrics, specific phrases that are kind of pleasing, and that's good advice. And avoid the clap, Jimmy Dugan are like two really delightful things to say at times when it's totally inappropriate. Like you're trying to get some milk at the grocery store, and someone bumps into you, and you just avoid the clap, Jimmy Dugan, and they leave you the fuck alone.
A wide berth has been given.
Yeah.
Well, while we're on the topic of film, what's your favorite book, comic, cartoon that you think would either make the best or worst choice for a big screen adaptation?
Wow. So I have actually thought a lot about this one. I was one of those kids that used to fantasize about like growing up and making movies about all the things I thought were cool.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm now an adult who's one of the people who gets upset when things that come out aren't quite the way they imagined it.
Join the club.
That's a natural thing. I thought a lot about this because there's so many things that I love that deserve the treatment of a big screen or just more viewership, and so I actually have an answer to both directions of that.
Sweet.
Worst and best.
Love
the worst adaptation I think makes a lot of sense just because of how notoriously badly these sorts of things get handled. I might have even said Gaunt's, but they've tried to adapt that like 5 times, and every attempt has been just atrocious.
Yeah.
Live action and the various cartoons, like the manga, it was just like the first story arc, and it was redacted, so it didn't really make sense within the greater scheme of things. But Berserk is the most deserving of actually the big screen presentation and the worst idea.
Really?
I think that it would be mishandled so colossally, and at the core of that story you have an incredibly painful and upsetting trauma. It's worse than the Red Wedding. It's like this is something that if presented to an audience in the way that I think that they might or do it like kind of tastelessly, and in the absence of the amount of expose and backstory that is due for that storyline, I mean, if you were to adapt it for the big screen, you'd have to shorten up a lot of things, and I don't think that there's enough. You'd be doing too much shortening to the impact of the end of the third arc. Age. Yeah. The way the first arc ends, what happens to Casca, and all of that leads into ostensibly the actual story that the artist I think wanted to tell. Like there were always hints at magic in the manga. There was even an elf most of the time. But in the drama that they made a manga of in like the 90s, they kind of did away with all the magic up until the very end.
Yeah.
And that's when magic that's when you realize it's there. And then the rest of the plot that never got serialized or shown in any sort of like video format is actually a very magical adventure. It feels a lot more like, it just felt like such a long build up. And I just know that they'd bungle it. I just know that they would take it and they would make it into something that was confusing to audiences, and it would come off as like gore porn of some kind.
I hope one day to be able to prove you wrong, because that is one of the scripts that I'm actively working on.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, please just do it justice.
I want to so bad.
It's such a complex and beautiful like story.
It is, but it's also like in the same vein as like Game of Thrones is right now, and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
It's like it's got its time, its moment is available at the time. Whether it gets bungled or not is what would.
Yeah, after Rings of Power, I have and Willow, I have no faith in most most scab writing communities for handling stuff. So
it's definitely a feat, to be sure.
Yeah, I'm excited about the idea of fans of the manga making something about it, and I'm not excited about the idea of a big studio getting their hands on it, because they make changes, and the changes often confuse the plot. And that one's plot is specifically so.
Oh yeah, it's so deep and needs so much care, to be sure.
It's so essential that all the all the pivot points get told in the complex relationship between Guts and Griffin, and without that, yeah, it's anyway. And then my pick for the most deserving of a big screen adaptation with the as the best potential is Saga.
Oh,
I think
interesting.
I think the world is ready for Saga. It's such a radical piece of countercultural like love poetry. Like it has this underlying message that's so universal and easy to understand. And it's an incredible anti-war piece, and it really fits into the current agenda. You don't have to change any of the characters to have a like a very, very diverse looking cast.
Yeah.
Which is, I think it hits one of the important notes for a lot of productions to even just get a chance at being made right now. Um, and the story is just it's so fucking important. It truly is a very marketable Romeo and Juliet that's not creepy.
Yeah, it's not creepy and doesn't have a stupid takeaway of children are dumb.
This is star-crossed lovers, and it's a story about a little girl.
Yeah. It's also a story about society more than it is about like the idea of that most people sadly don't know is that Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet to warn adults that children shouldn't be allowed any responsibility because they're dumb. Which he's kind of not wrong about.
She's also 14.
She's also 14. But I mean, it's just like the idea, like the takeaway from the story from Shakespeare was like, don't let your kids make decisions.
Yeah, like Romeo spends the first like 10 minutes of that play like absolutely gushing with love over someone else. And he just changes on a whip, and that's one of the jokes in the play. But like actually, it's kind of pointing out like, hey, all of this should make you uncomfortable.
What would you say is your biggest everyday temptation?
Wow. I gotta tell you, those Lord of the Rings cards. There's a store up the street. I could just go there and get some right now. I don't even want the One Ring. It's a perfect confluence of fandoms for me. Unfortunately, I've been able to resist buying Magic cards pretty well. I still splurge. I spend huge chunks of cash here and there as I need dopamine sometimes, and to mix the collection up a little bit when something especially spicy gets printed. And but yeah, the FOMO is real. I just know that if I don't purchase some of this product, that I will be very sad in 10 years when suddenly it's expensive to just buy single cards from it.
Yeah,
and it's not available on shelves anymore except for like exorbitant amounts per pack. And I really like the lands and a lot of the reimaginings. I'm still wrapping my brain around a lot of the the redepictions, and wanting personally to have a box somewhere where I have all of my favorite characters from the book series made into decks, and that's what they want. That's how they get you. I'm sure that's what it must have been like for the people who are into Transformers when they started sliding Transformers cards into the flip card part of some booster packs. Yeah, that is a big temptation. I think that's got to be my answer, right? It's not cigarettes. That's.
I'm glad it's something purchasable that doesn't give you cancer.
Yeah, so. I mean, I do. It's a close second, but mostly I just enjoy those like when I'm thoroughly understimulated and disassociating. So Tuesdays.
If you could check your life stats, what non-requisite or YouTube activity do you think you have the most amount of hours logged on?
Wow. That's rough. It's hard to know because there's so many periods of my life where I got burnt out and I just relied heavily on a video game for support.
It could just be video games in general then. Like if it's not one title.
Yeah, it's not one. Video games for sure have been something that I spend ridiculous amounts of time like not playing, and then occasionally just dive in on a game and really allow it to warp my schedule. And I don't feel guilty about that. There's actually a great podcast called Pixel Therapy that I listened to a few episodes of, and kind of changed my framework for how I think about video game abuse and really substance use in general in terms of self-medication. and that a lot of people like myself who are just generally overwhelmed by a world that does not have a lot of people in it who pay us money and also offer us praise for the job we do. That that like it kind of makes sense that a dopamine seeking activity like video games, where there's easy to accomplish objectives, kind of laid out for you, that you actually get some of the praise that you require from your work, but just aren't getting by just going home and playing some video games before bed. Um, and that in a lot of ways, really rough burnouts can be a time of social isolation, and actually working yourself back into like a cognitive form of a human being can really be aided by having low impact activities to kind of exercise your brain while you're in a recumbent state. Um, and so when I think about video games as something that I've logged a lot of hours in, I see that more as like that's a lot of convalescence. Like that's a lot of hours that I've spent in pretty maladaptive self care, if you will, but a form of self care that I think actually works for a lot of people.
What would you say is the proudest accomplishment you've done that the fewest people know of?
Um, well, I guess um, one thing that I'm really proud of is a blog that it's currently being hosted by Oaksterdam University, uh, oaksterdamu.com or something like that. But there's an institution in Oakland that is hosting it for free. So it's a free blog, and the blog more or less details a cannabis grow that I participated in with my dad. He actually wrote it. He's a novelist, so it's kind of his um, pastime to document stuff. And he got asked to do this because shelter in place had happened, and so all the in-person classes had been canceled.
Mm-hmm.
And he was an alumni of the university there. We actually grow cannabis for medicine. Um, and so we started putting together this blog where we were just pretty meticulously documenting everything we were doing. And at a certain point, we had a relatively frank conversation about what it means to be a cannabis cultivator for, like pretty much exclusively for personal use. What it means to live somewhere where that's legal. What it means to own property and be able to grow on that property. What it means to be white in the cannabis industry, which is a place of privilege. There's a lot of white cannabis enthusiasts who are not punished in the same way that non-white cannabis enthusiasts are. And so from this place of privilege, with this incredible gift that we've been given in terms of like having running spring water on our property and really, really good soil and pretty incredible permaculture actually as part of the national park in Point Reyes, that we had to do everything in our power to make sure that this stayed free, and it did, and it still is right now. You can go and find this, and it's a long read. I mean, it's huge chunks every couple of days for the duration of a plant's life cycle, so from seed to final harvest.
Whoa.
But it's a pretty comprehensive how to grow cannabis in your backyard for anyone who wants it. And for me, it's like, okay, there's still barriers in place, right? You have to have access to a computer to like just read this blog or like, get it in a format so you can print it out. But it more or less contains within it the instructions for how to grow cannabis if you don't know how to, and what mistakes to avoid doing. And all that, it's all free online somewhere out there. It still exists. It will be probably free forever, hopefully. But the idea in mind was like, okay, well, this is this information that we've gathered and garnished by virtue of having the privilege to do so. If we don't make this accessible to like as many people as possible, especially those who are disenfranchised from the experience of this like generational knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
then what the fuck are we doing? Like, then, ultimately, that goes against both of our beliefs on cannabis equity. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm really proud of that, but it's also not something that I'm supposed to advertise very much. Like on my personal Instagram, for instance, because exactly the type of people that like visit properties to rip cannabis off during harvest time would probably be able to deduce where I live if I was making a lot of noise about it. And I really don't want people showing up to my grow site and harassing my parents with weapons or something. Like I
Yeah,
just
that doesn't seem awesome.
it's tricky. It's tricky. Like realistically, it's not a terribly safe thing to even show pictures of your grow or tell people that you're close to that your grow's there, because they could tell someone and that person could tell someone, and then some idiots with a bunch of scissors could show up and cut down a bunch of premature plants, and that happens in California, and that's been happening in California for a very long time, since well before it was legal. There's still not much that Californian growers can do about getting ripped off. We're not even allowed to put our money in banks or get like bank loans for cannabis businesses because they're all federally insured, and it's still a Schedule II substance. But yeah, that just the simple fact that blog is out there exists. I came out during the blog, actually, so there's like an acknowledgement of that at one point when my name changes, like during the blog, which is pretty cool.
That's fucking awesome.
Although it took a really long time to get them to change the pronouns that they used for me, like in the blog after that happened. So like I was kind of still getting misgendered a little bit in there, but that was just an editorial thing where someone had to do like a word search, I'm pretty sure. And then they got behind that. So now I feel a lot more comfortable sharing it because it's actually an accurate representation. And almost all the pictures in the blog I actually took with my phone, including a lot of like insects in the middle of hunting other insects like on my flowering plants, like spiders chasing flies and all kinds of cool little pests and pathogens. And there's even I think a step-by-step video is still somewhere on there for how to like process flour that you have excess of if you want to like use alcohol to turn it into a tincture or something like that. And it's all free.
And can you say the name of it again so people can find it?
Oaksterdamuniversity.com. And I think the best way to find it, as long as it's still up, is, let me just see if I can't find a domain for it and send that over.
So oaksteruniversity.com, and then it's their...
I'm going to find a link to the blog right now because it's probably buried in some stuff.
Well, while that happens, before we throw it to commercial break, if you could have listeners of this podcast hear one song of your choosing, which would it be?
Yeah, probably. Gosh, there's so many like random songs that are high up on my list. There's one like in specific that I think that it's kind of subversive music, or like you might put quotes around the word music, but it's this a cappella piece by a band that's I think they're called Partita for 8 Voices, or at least that's the assemblage, but really it's Carolyn Shaw, and the song is number 3, Curante. And it's just a very very breathy and very transcendent piece of music that it tends to come to mind when I'm like walking in the forest or kayaking.
Awesome. And with that, we're going to throw it to our first break. Feel free to stick around and enjoy the totally real commercial, or take a minute to enjoy Partita for 8 Voices, number 3, Curante by Roomful Teeth. Or if you really wanted to hear a song from a previous episode, check out the playlist on Spotify, Passionate People and Preposterous Peeves podcast, Song Rex. It's a long title, I know. Don't worry, there's a link in the description. Either way, see you in a jiffy. Have you ever just looked at fried carbs on a plate and thought, I need to eat those, but it doesn't taste all that appetizing? Introducing catsup. Catsup is a sugary and red syrupy paste that'll overshadow any unappreciated taste. Simply douse the unpreferred tasting object and ingest. Thanks, catsup. Welcome back, everybody. So, B, what is the passion you've brought with you today?
Oh gosh, I've talked about some of the other ones, but Magic the Gathering lore is something that I actually used to fall back on when like being put in any awkward situation. Of course, I didn't realize I was autistic at the time, so I just had these like long monologues that I would store up, like kind of like bullets in a gun, and I would just wait for some unsuspecting bastards that I could unleash it on as soon as they inconvenienced me. I was a prolific bus talker. Like as soon as someone wanted to be the one talking on the bus to me, I would overtalk them out of safety concerns. And And usually I could take almost any conversation and drift it towards Magic the Gathering lore and how interesting and fascinating that was. And I'll give you a hint. It's actually not that interesting or fascinating if you're not into
if you're not a part
Magic
of
the Gathering. In fact, it's dreadfully boring. But I discovered the Magic storyline kind of on a whim. And I really liked some of the depictions, and especially as a twin, the story of Urza and Mishra really resonated because, as everyone knows, Urza and Mishra have a birthday that's like a day apart, and so for like a 12-hour period, they actually are the same age every year.
So, when did you first get introduced to Magic, and especially Magic lore? When did that like start to take hold?
It would have been 1995.
Oh wow!
And I was in summer camp, and some of the older kids were showing up with cards to trade. I don't think I really even saw an official like actual deck for years. Like it would be my first Magic cards were a raffle that I won in the second grade. It was the first time I'd won anything in any kind of raffle, and it would be the only time I'd win anything in a raffle for quite some time after that. Not a very lucky kid usually. And I opened a pack of Fallen Empires, and I got a Deep Spawn, which is a 6/6 for about 8 mana that has a bunch of horrendous drawbacks, but it was the coolest art. I want to say Mark Tadine, but I'm like spacing it. It might have been Drew Tucker, Anson Maddox, or like one of those. I'm pretty sure it's Mark Tadine though.
Spell the name of the
Deep Spawn.
Deep
Spawn. It's a giant lobster.
Yeah. It's why doesn't it say it on the what the heck? Mark Tadine. Yeah, you're right.
Mark Tadine. Yeah, it's Tadine. You can tell by the use of chrome scale. So like there's just a lot of different blues showing up in this artwork, but it has this passive ability of like it just looks like a very distant underwater giant thing, and like there's all these things that combine together to make it cool art. And the art and my interest in the storyline is actually goes hand in hand with the art, because it was in '97 that Tempest came out. I was at Diamond Sports Cards, and someone who had just come from one of the pre-releases I didn't even know that was a thing at that age. I mean, Tempest hadn't come out yet. It was going to come out in like a week. I didn't even know what the expansion symbol looked like. And I had been saving up my allowance and basically just buying packs of like Mirage, Visions, and Weatherlight, not really understanding the cards, going, what the like what? you go to the store and it's like, all right, well, there's like a $20 pack of Arabian Nights, like not wasting my money on that. But I could get all these Fallen Empire packs for $1 each, or Chronicles was another one that was like $1 each a pack. And so the way I collected was definitely budgetary, but without knowing what cards I was going for, even like deck building theory, I was just stabbing in the dark with like a booster pack at a time for years. If you've ever opened a pack of Mirage, Visions, or Weatherlight, aside from some really cool artwork, prepare to be underwhelmed. You can't really like it's not.
Prepare to be underwhelmed.
Homelands was on shelves too, but there's not a lot of really powerful cards that actually came out of those sets like in a vacuum. Like there's a bunch of powerful cards, sure, but even at the time they weren't really as exploitable as they are now. But in all of the cards I'd been collecting, including Chronicles, it has a really good sampling of some of the Four Horsemen sets, and a nightmarish amount of third edition. Like revised and fourth edition got heavy play in my household. I wish I'd opened more fifth edition just so I could have more fifth edition basic lands, because they're kind of pretty, and that just speaks to the volume of third edition packs that were opened in the quest for dual lands and random other shit. So I knew a lot of names that show up on those cards, and anyone who played during that era was curious. Who was Ashnod? Who was Tawnos? Who is Felden and Hercule? Who are these people that are like being referenced on these cards? Like Amulet of Krug. Who is Kyla Ben Krug? What was her? What's the significance here?
Yeah.
Why was she throwing out healing amulets and stuff? Urza's War Machine, Mishra's Workshop. Like there's just a tremendous amount of lore embedded in the cards for their first set, and then they taper off a little bit and they do a bunch of random bullshit. Like the Legends storyline is this unhinged Madarin, like it's just not, it's real high fantasy, and it's pre Planeswalker, and I believe it's pre Magic. Like there wasn't really about that much magic going on in the storyline for a while. It had to be woken up, which is a whole other thing. Actually, Jaya Ballard plays a huge part in that storyline, but a lot of people don't even know that Jaya Ballard has like many books that come before her involvement in the Dominaria storyline, like more recently. And that's been a joy to watch while being kind of financially divorced from buying a lot of Standard, because I can just read the spoilers stories on for free on Wizards website and maybe get the one or two cards I'm curious about. I do like that. But the lore itself, it follows a really tragedy laden path. So like a lot of characters die or get mutated or turn to the dark side or whatever throughout the story. It spans thousands of years, which is something I look for in an involved plot line that I'm like, gonna want to get attached to. And it's just been going on for so long now that I've genuinely had moments where I actually like started to have like a physical body response where I was like crying while reading some of the newer stuff. And I don't know how I feel about that. Like I don't care about it. I obviously don't care about it, but then I'll read like an especially beautiful passage, and I think it's so easy for me to be transported to the world of Magic because I thought about it a lot. That when I read a particularly well written part, like I'm specifically referring to I forget who the artist was or who the writer was, but there's a part of the Magic storyline in the Ixalan storyline where one of the first chapters is kind of devoted to Jace the Mind Sculptor waking up with no memory of who he is, and he's eventually rescued by Vraska on a pirate ship, which is just the most ridiculous way.
Love it.
I was so skeptical when I saw spoilers for Ixalan because I was like, oh wait a minute. You're okay. We've done ninjas, and I could get behind ninjas when it belonged to a plane, but you're telling me you've got merfolk, vampires, conquistador vampires, not just any vampires, but like conquistador ones wearing conquistador hats, which makes so much fucking sense. The merfolk, dinosaurs, and pirates and dinosaurs being in the same set together made no sense to me at first, and I fucking love it so much. Like flavor wise, Ixalan is just an incredible achievement, I think, in terms of world building, which is something I do for my job now, so I can appreciate it with kind of a different lens. But yeah, Jace waking up and slowly realizing that he is a powerful wizard, but still having no memory. It's just so
You're
well
a wizard,
written.
Jace.
The way that he goes through this period of like being hungry, trying to get food, and kind of hallucinating because he's starving, but then he realizes that he has, or he at least in some part can, while in this animus state, control certain things, and so he forces the sun to set like right away. And that's when it dawns on him that he's either going completely mad or he's actually a powerful wizard. And the whole thing, the way it's written is it all just makes so much sense. And it was so easy to fall right into what it must have felt like to wake up on that world. And I think they do a lovely job with that. And they don't do such a lovely job including all the characters that are on their cards, which is a recurring theme. You may have noticed that some of the characters that show up in like story spotlights and in the artwork of cards don't actually have a place in the story at all. And that's where you can kind of see WotC, like they think ahead, where they're writing the story out beforehand, where they can get some good like story spotlights on cards, but then they make changes to the story and they make changes to the card sheet after that period. And so there's almost every single set, there's almost always discrepancies between the plot and the story that gets told on their website and the actual artwork in the cards, including like what characters are wearing or like where they're showing up. And that bugs the shit out of me. So I when Tempest first came out and someone handed me Tempest cards and was like, check this out, and I started to recognize characters that I had seen in just random art in Mirage Visions and Weatherlight, I started to grow a little bit more attached to the game that I was actively kind of just curious about. And my interest in Magic waned a lot. Like my interest in the story was a lot more, I think, than even collecting for a good period of time there. So like at a certain point, Nemesis came out. And it felt like years later, but it really wasn't that much longer. Nemesis came out and I opened a pack and I got Belby's Portal and I saw in the artwork for Belby's Portal, which again is I think is another Mark Tadine artwork. That Eladamri is holding his slain daughter, and then there's a portal that's opening up, and another elf is like yelling at him like, "Come on, like the fight continues this way" or whatever. And like one of my favorite cards from Tempest was Eladamri, Lord of the Leaves. Great elf card, by the way. But kind of it was like a summon legend that counts as an elf. I think like it's got a bunch of text on there that just to remind you, yeah, this guy's an actual elf. And I want to say the artwork's like Julie Barrow or someone like that, but did a bunch of artwork in the Urza Saga era. Anyway, so seeing a character that was a legendary creature that I really liked on one of the new cards, it started to give me hope that the story was going to continue and that I was going to start to be able to make associations with the plot that story that I cared about and this dumb game that I liked. It has morphed and changed, and they've introduced the concept of planeswalkers, and they've changed what that looks like by forcing a card type out there. And I think they're in the middle of a recession where they're actually going to deliberately try to tone back the involvement of planeswalkers and how they design sets so that they can let some of their other card types and mechanics kind of take over. Like games are just better with less planeswalkers. I think everyone can agree who has been around long enough to see both that there was a fundamental mathematic understanding that went into the basic game, and that's kind of somewhat absent from the high variance that we see in like modern standard, even legacy, where new cards tend to make really big splashes instead of just like being a consistent 2 for 2. But
so
actually,
did you ever,
sorry, go ahead.
Did you ever have, before this interaction, did you ever have anything that sucked you in like this before that would either be story or fandom or just, experience that really? Because this, like, it sounds like, oh, I saw cards, cool. Oh, story, interesting. And then it was just this, like, became not your world. You weren't, like, walking around just as one of these characters, but it was this, it was kind of almost this, it's kind of like the way some people are with, like World of Warcraft, where not only is it this game that they play, but it's this constant story. There are these characters, there's these motifs that really keep bringing them back.
I mean, I think I was pretty geared up and primed for it, by virtue of being such a David Attenborough nut and like really absorbing all the National Geographic content I could, because I think that my involvement in the Magic story and my interest in it, it may have come about in conjunction with seeing Tempest cards and seeing some storyline cards show up. And then actually our family went on a vacation, and it was the first time we ever left the country, to Canada, to British Columbia. And while I was there, it's such a random thing. I had to go into like a little side shop on a body of water. I can't remember if it was a lake or if it was the gap between British Columbia and Vancouver. But we were taking a little boat around, and I was getting so badly eaten alive by mosquitoes. I didn't realize this, but there's different species of mosquito in different areas. So as a kid, I got very used to getting bit by mosquitoes in like Marin County, and then fucking discovered that the different species, I had no kind of immunity. My immune system, which is already hyper allergic, I have pretty hyper allergic responses to a lot of things, just went absolutely nuts. And so I was like covered in these mosquito bites that itched like crazy for like a solid week. And so I went in to get some medicine, and on a magazine rack that had a lot of empty spots, I saw a Magic the Gathering comic book. And I don't know if you know this, but in Canada there actually was a Magic the Gathering comic run.
Awesome.
For the Duelist, for the original Weatherlight story. So the whole story of Gerard and Captain Sisay are going to rescue Captain Sisay from the and Stark's daughter from the bowels of Volroth's stronghold, and like opening a portal and going through, gathering a crew, the original Weatherlight crew, and busting into Volroth's stronghold to rescue Sisay and Stark's daughter Takara, and the whole tragic and misshapen way in which like Krovax gets screwed over and gets a vampiric curse placed on him, and Miri jumps overboard to rescue Gerard, who she's like a cat warrior, but she's got a huge boner for Gerard. And the whole thing was all like I got just enough from that comic book to like, and then I got home and I couldn't find it, and no one knew about it. No one even knew what it was because it was a Canadian thing apparently. I would find out years later that the comic didn't do well. But but it was a pretty accurate. I think the issue I had a depiction of how Volroth tortures Karn the Silver Golem by casting a spell on Squee that makes Squee basically unable to die. He uses like a really messed up Phyrexian thing to do it too. So like Squee's basically just permanently stuck in this constant state of regeneration. And then has Karn set up on this slab where he basically gets slid and dropped onto Squee and crushes Squee to death. And then the Karn gets lifted back up again and kind of just Squee reassembles, has like a painful like reanimation process, and then they just drop him again and he just keeps crushing his friend to death. And he's a pacifist, which is why it's like the worst torture for him to trot on something under his feet. That was what the episode was geared on. And there's a ton of artwork in Tempest Stronghold, specifically Stronghold, but also Exodus, that depicts all of the things that are in all of also the Carrionet thing. When the Weatherlight breaks into the Volroth Stronghold, they have to go through the catacombs, and there's a tar pit down there that's filled with these skeletons that have like sliver tails, and there's also a sliver hive down there. And so this is the introduction of slivers was in this episode. And in all the artwork throughout those sets, there's a ton of depictions of stories. In fact, there's very few cards in Tempest that aren't specifically referring the story. And there's one that springs to mind. There's only one card, I think, in Tempest that didn't have artists dedicated to making a Tempest themed design file, and that was the card Bayou Dragonfly. And Bayou Dragonfly was supposed to be for the set Astral. It was like an online only set, and they just kind of slid it in. They just sort of slid it in there like to fill in a slot. I think it was because they already had they didn't want to do Marsh Boa, and they had already done like a 2/1 regenerating snake. So that was in Visions anyway. But yeah, they ended up going with Bayou Dragonfly, and it's the only thing in the entire set that doesn't like make sense art wise with everything else that's going on. Even though it's the same soft tones, I think it's like a Julie Barrow artwork or something like that.
Well, to interject and stop you from casting Gush any more times than you already have. That's for all you nerds at home. What would your dream involvement be with this passion you have? What would you like it to look like? What would you hope it would amount to?
Gosh, I wish that we had done this before the before the wrapping up of the New Phyrexia March of the Machine storyline, because that was one of the quickest endings to. Yeah, I mean, I think I would like to see them stop trying to make a new big bad guy and start just.
No, sorry, I might have said the question.
Okay,
so
go ahead again.
Your love of this is very pure, very deep. Is there anything that you see yourself doing in regards to Magic? Do you like drawing, writing storylines? Would you ever want to get involved in the creation of anything like this?
Oh yeah, I mean, if I had a chance to do creative with WotC, I got ideas. Let me tell you. And that's the thing is that I've had a subtle influence at WotC without really fully realizing it myself. Occasionally, someone I know who I used to mess around with card design with actually works there now and is and regularly tests in the Future League. And so I've gotten little hints and teasers down the line that cards that he and I actually designed got turned into actual Magic cards.
Oh, cool.
And so yeah, and I actually still have playtest cards from some of the sets that I worked on with James. They're just like the playtest cards you'd get at like a convention or something, or you'd see at Wizards of the Coast headquarters. It's the same like template file or whatever. So it's got card name, casting cost, ability, etc. And then those are just slid into penny sleeves with basic lands. And the set itself was it was like a vanilla matters thing, but we had a bunch of like extra ability creatures that were kind of to help disrupt that a little bit, and cards that had abilities temporarily, so we could kind of get around the need for just a bunch of bears basically being in the set. But it turns out that so one of the cards that we worked on that eventually, I mean, they get changed around so much in design. So like you'll be like, oh yeah, I worked on this card, and it was like a creature, but then like the card is an artifact now. But it's Altar of the Brood was a card that that it came from a design that James and I worked on, and also James explicitly told me that Rankle Master Thief, the little fairy guy from the Lorwyn set, was a nod to me and a card that we had like put together. And so I didn't really like follow the Eldraine storyline that much, but there was a magic spotlight with Rankle in the Phyrexia invasion where Rankle teams up with Torbrand to like prevent the Phyrexians from winning in Eldraine, and it's a pretty good read, and it made me go, okay, all right, maybe I sort of get the Rankle approach, because Rankle is very much, even though Rankle's a fairy, Rankle's like category 1 changeling goblin energy, and I actually I've got partners in my life who are very much that, like, categorically, so that's pretty neat. I would love to do art for Magic the Gathering, especially I look at them enough, but the maps and world building that take place when they're constructing a new plane, like, I got ideas, but that's kind of what I do now. And it doesn't necessarily have to be for WotC, though I would love to, like, have my own plane to work on, just like Karn, or like that black dragon that invented Phyrexia before dying and Yawgmoth found it.
What would you say is the biggest misconception about Magic lore by the wider world?
Oh God, this hurts so much to say, but it's that it's just a bunch of nerdy shit that's all about wizards. That's a big one, and I played a hand in spreading that misconception myself as a younger person. I would often describe it as this cool fantasy game, and I think people associate storyline and lore and kind of like the flavor aspects of it when they think about Magic. They think about iconic things, not necessarily the structure of the game, because a lot of people who don't play Magic won't really know it that way and that sort of intimacy. So the things will kind of pop up that are like iconic artwork or iconic card names. Yeah, I don't really see it that way. It's a Magic the Gathering at its core is a tempo-based game of mathematics. And when you remove the fantasy element, i.e., you remove the artwork from the card and you remove the name as it relates to geography or something, and we're just talking about 6-drop flying red dragon is like the name of the card now, or whatever, not even dragon, just flyer, like this power toughness. And when you strip it down to that, it's actually just a very sophisticated math game. And the trick with Magic, in terms of like consistently having people who enjoy playing but are easy to beat, is finding people who can appreciate the game for both aspects: the mathematical part, where it's actually a hard game to win, and the fantasy aspect, where things happen sometimes that are quite silly, like sacrificing Xiao Dun the One-Eyed and getting 2 eyeball counters on your drive eyeballs. It makes no fucking sense, but but it has a table laughing, and maybe you put those cards in your deck just to elicit that laugh and maybe to distract from some other combo you're working on. That the misconception is often that it's this nerdy enterprise, and you'll find that most of the people who take the game very seriously are not very nerdy at all. Not in the sense that you might be thinking right away, and that while the bulk of players who engage in the game and enjoy the game have just a mild interest in fantasy, that some of the most success that I've seen people have playing the game on a professional level, or even just as traders or for fun, comes about with a much more dedicated approach that's actually very discipline-like, and no different from any common esport in terms of like testing and practicing and making sure you're prepared for the environment of a tournament, and making sure that you're properly medicated by the end of the tournament so that you don't fall apart. Um, I definitely get fatigued through large events, and I realize that that's a limiting factor of mine that I just have to kind of come to terms with. I'm not going to win a big event unless I get my hands on a prescription for Adderall and a team of people with towels and water and food nearby, which is possible, but
Yeah.
it's not really worth it. I'm not having fun at that point if
Yeah.
I'm, like the whole point of me going to big events used to be is just the way it made me feel. That first day when you can't really sleep that night because there's just a whole other day of match tomorrow, and then the following day is Sunday. That like made me feel real good. I didn't sleep. I was like clearly having a manic episode almost every event, but I was having a ball. Like it was the time of my
Yeah.
life. Absolutely the time of my life.
What would you say is your favorite non-obvious aspect to Magic lore?
Um, Gosh.
Is there a story a lot of nerds don't know about? Is there aspects of writing? Do they have like how good is their tie back in
Yeah,
method?
so there's a lot of things about the magic lore that remind me of the Silmarillion, which is of course J.R.R. Tolkien's expanded uh, piece of writing that kind of backs up the full story of how the Lord of the Rings even came to be. And in Magic, I understand somewhat intimately some of the most important and keystone like pivots or moments in time in which something happened that changed the nature of the game, and a lot of those actually went hand in hand with rules changes in the game too, which is kind of funny. Um, but yeah, it wasn't always a story about actual magic, and that the Brothers War especially they revisited it recently in a set, and I thought that was really neat that like they kind of had Teferi go back in time, but he can't really affect anything. He can just kind of watch, and
Mm.
so they kind of let that happen, which is cool. They got a chance to sort of revisit and reimagine some of the way that the cards would work, which I don't even all agree with necessarily. But at its core, you have a story that is really beautiful and very much like a space opera, um, that leads into the framework for everything that's come since. So like the the fall of the Thrawn is actually it's also who wrote that? The Brothers War was written by Jeff Grubb, and the fall of the Thrawn was written I think by Alan Moore, or someone who he wrote most of the Invasion books, but he wasn't very. It wasn't like a very good writer. Like there's huge sections of the Invasion books, and even
The Thrawn is the prologue to Invasions. It was written by J. Robert King.
J. Robert King. Okay, okay. J. Robert King is actually he's up there in the good. Okay, so it wasn't the dude who did the Invasion ones. Like I got really tired of his writing, but it was like in the same way that one gets tired of R.A. Salvatore's writing, where it's like you're just reading the same words about slashing swords for like a while. And like a lot of verbose descriptions of battles that could have been focused on an individual instead, but it's just like these long sweeping paragraphs. They're like, okay, boring, yawn, get this out of here. But the Brothers War and the Fall of the Thrawn, it looks like one of the random magic novels that you don't even want to read, because it's just going to involve a bunch of characters you never hear about. And for a long time, that was true. There really weren't very many characters that participated in the Fall of the Thrawn Empire that didn't show up except for in like the flavor text of like Urza's Saga cards. Um, but at its core, the story of the Thrawn is about a civilization that learns how to use technology, which manifests itself in the form of power stones for them. But they kind of like they believe in religion and they believe in technology. And they're kind of a techno-religious state, and they have a giant city that's powered by these power stones that's just constantly sending polluted air down at a lower class of people. and that at its core, the story is about this mad scientist Yawgmoth who he's a clinician. He's like a vet basically, and he studies diseases. But like because he lives in a technologically advanced religious cult, he's not allowed to like do science or whatever. And so he leaves and he conducts a bunch of fucked up experiments on all the different races of Dominaria for a period of time. And he's just a human. He's just a guy. He's not even he's not even a bad guy except for that part. He's mostly just a very curious scientist who has no ethical problem with dropping a disease
morals
in a group of dwarves, and then it kills all the dwarves. And he's like, okay, and he writes that down and he goes to the next village. And like that was his whole thing. He would befriend these communities and get in with them, and then release a pox of some kind, and then just study the pimples, because what he was trying to figure out was how to prevent death. That was his life's goal. And so he actually had a very noble cause for all of this pain and suffering that he caused in those few years when he got kicked out of the Thrawn Empire.
Why? I wonder why that happened.
Well, I mean, at the time he got kicked out because of germ theory. He was trying to tell people that there were germs, and they were like, "That's insane. It's obviously God and the Power Stones. Whatever. Get out of here." And they kick him out. And it's only after one of the sick peasants that lives on the ground below then they're all dying. They're sick from a disease called pharesis. And pharesis, it oil comes out of their stuff and they kind of rot to death. It's really bad. So like they have a revolt down there, and they send some warriors up through the Thrawn Forge, which is this giant rig that is able to extract and compress magma and turn it into power stones that they use for their power, from the Shiv volcano. And they raid the rig, and Gix, one of the slaves, grabs a power stone and breaks it into pieces and takes a shard and stabs Glacian with it. And when he stabs Glacian with it, Glacian is the king of the Thrawn, but he's also their head scientist, kind of like Urza. Urza wouldn't have been born for thousands of years, but yeah. So Glacian gets sick with pharesis, and as all of their prayers fail, they realize they have to find Yawgmoth and they have to get him back to the capital to see if he can help. And so they go find him, and they don't know anything about what he's done. And he is basically Rasputin for the Thrawn Empire for a little bit. He falls in love with Glacian's wife, Rebek, and he starts to try to seduce her. He discovers that it's in fact a shard of the Power Stone that's causing the king to be sick, but rather than like remove all the Power Stone, he leaves a little shard inside, and he puts the rest of the Power Stone under the guy's pillow, and the guy just keeps getting sicker and sicker while Yawgmoth tries to seduce Rebek, his wife. So Glacian and Rebek, those are the king and queen of the Thrawn Empire, and all the while he's kind of becoming like a second in charge. He's getting all this authority, and that's when because Glacian is a planeswalker and his spark is not ignited yet, but he's sick and his spark is kind of shimmering. A nearby planeswalker who happens to be passing Dominaria sees the spark and is like, "Oh, this is interesting. I'm going to check that out." And back then, planeswalkers were way more powerful. So this planeswalker shows up and is like, "Oh, you're cool. Hey, like, are you okay? What's going on?" And Yawgmoth's more than happy to explain, but also is like, "Where did you come from?" Because like she just appears in the middle of the room and it's like, "Oh my god, this is what I've needed. I've always needed." And so they just think he's the doctor. And this planeswalker takes Glacian on a magical tour that Yawgmoth gets to bear witness to of a bunch of different planes. One of the planes that this planeswalker visits with Glacian that Yawgmoth sees is Phyrexia. But at the time, it's literally just a giant metal plane that everything that lives there is a metal being that has oil for blood. Mostly they're newts. And the plane is invented by a black dragon planeswalker who just decides he wants to have his own plane, and the black dragon planeswalker dies of old age, and the dragon just died. So they go there, and the planeswalker is like, "Isn't this neat? This dragon that I know made this, but he just passed away. Anyway, we're leaving." And Yawgmoth's like, "Wait a second, these creatures don't die from old age ever." And that's what sparks Yawgmoth's whole idea of just curing death is completion, is like, the completion of the biological organism's purpose, which is to survive. It's not through reproduction; it's through this other process called completion, where you replace all the blood with oil, and he thinks it's a great idea. And so he's also the wizard who manages to figure out that the way you stop a planeswalker from planeswalking is you stab them in the brain. Which for a long time that was kind of the only way you could get a planeswalker, because they were omnipotent. They could change into any shape at any time, and so the early planeswalker battles are actually really brutal because they have access to unlimited mana. It's not just the mana that they can tap. It's just infinite mana all the time. For all planeswalkers, which it's dangerous, but they're just
gods.
They were way more powerful back then. Yeah. But they were way more powerful, but they were also incredibly naive. There was no gatewatch. There was nothing. There was no organization. They rarely knew each other. And this planeswalker shows up mostly to try to welcome Glacian into the fold of planeswalkers, but she can tell that he's not ready yet. But what she can't tell is that the power stone that Glacian is stabbed by and is sleeping on is sucking his spark out into it. By the end of the storyline, finally they find out all the different communities from around the world of Dominaria find out that Yawgmoth's back, and that he's the one who's helping Glacian get better, and that he's basically taken over the Throm Empire, and Glacian dies, and the Power Stone that Glacian had under him that's got his spark in it, this inert thing, is actually used by Rebek to seal the portal to Phyrexia. Rebek is like, I'll go with you, Yawgmoth. Yeah, you go without me. I'll be right behind. I gotta grab some stuff.
Just gonna grab this one little thing real quick.
Yawgmoth enters the portal to Phyrexia, and right as he enters the portal, he's already started to send nobles through the portal to. He's tried to send nobles through the portal to convert them, and so there's already Phyrexians that are now fully at his bidding, that are coming through, and they're horrible monstrosities. All the cards you see from like Phyrexians from Urza Saga, the set, are that's what's coming through the Thrawn set. There's just these ghastly, and some of them still remember who they are. Like there's one. Critic who's been a card now, Critic, son of Yawgmoth. It's not actually his son. That's just one of the people that he converted and had a horrible conversion process and became this like demented thing. But so Rebek seals the portal, and the portal is sealed in a cavern beneath the Thrawn city, and it's so tainted by Phyresis that for thousands of years no one can really live there. By the time Urza and Mishra discover the closed portal that Rebek sealed, that is the only thing keeping Yawgmoth from entering Dominaria ever again, other than Rebek herself, is the Cave of Koilos. Urza and Mishra are excavating the Cave of Koilos with Takasia, their teacher, in like an after school program. Like a lot, all the rich merchants get sent back to like the main bazaar hub or whatever, and because Urza and Mishra are orphaned, they just stay with Takasia and help her in between seasons, and she ends up raising them basically. But they're excavating the Cave of Koilos, and it's their accidental grabbing of the Power Stone together when it splits in half that actually is what opens up the portal to Phyrexia. And those two Power Stones are the very same Power Stones that Might Stone and Weak Stone, when the Golgothian Silex is activated by Urza using mana for the first time ever to cast a spell. He empties all the mana he can summon into the Golgothian Silex, and it blows up so powerfully that Argothia as a continent sinks into the ocean. And the two gemstone halves that are finally reunited because Mishra and Urza are in close proximity, like a freak accident, they explode and they get launched into Urza's head, and they embed themselves where his eyes used to be. And when the spark reignites through his brain, he becomes a planeswalker. So neither Urza or Mishra were planeswalkers. They were both sparkless brothers.
Sparkless little turds.
Yeah, they were just like desert whelps. And while Mishra's backstory before the Phyrexian takeover is actually really compelling too, like I was kind of rooting for both of them in the book. Mishra gets captured and enslaved, and Urza kind of like works his way into like a clockmaker's apprentice job, and kind of just like forgets that he had a brother and that he blew up Tocasia, and that anything bad happened. And that story is also fascinating. But what I really think is fascinating about the whole thing is that there's a lot of things that, like Cave of Koilos, Might Sun, Weak Sun, Urza, they're all interrelated. Yawgmoth being a human, never being a planeswalker. Like, a lot of people who get into Magic and start doing their own fantasy cards, they all made this mistake of like being like, and here's Yawgmoth, and they make Yawgmoth this like avatar horror thing, and it's like, no, that like the Yawgmoth we got in modern Masters or Modern Horizons, yeah, I think it was Modern Horizons. That's a great depiction of Yawgmoth. That's who Yawgmoth was. It doesn't go past there, because once it goes past there, we're talking about an avatar that you can't really have a card for.
Wow.
And Rebic, who was Halcyon's sweetheart and also Yawgmoth's sweetheart, her magic is so powerful that when she closes the portal in the Caves of Koilos and locks Yawgmoth out of Dominaria for what would ostensibly be forever, except for some events that unfold later, she actually, her spirit endures and she becomes what is known as Gaia.
Oh, cool.
So all of the green magic, all the protector of Dominaria, the very spirit that when Freyalise casts the world spell during the Ice Age, reawakes the plane and plunges it out of the Ice Age that the entirety of Dominaria gets launched into as a direct result of the Golgothian Silex being activated. That the force of nature that brings Dominaria back to life from the Ice Age is also Rebic, her spirit, in the form of Gaia.
Damn. Well, while I could listen to this for literally ever and occasionally have had the opportunity to do so, we're gonna have to go on to our next segment. So
oh yeah. No, I could keep talking about it too, but it's just fascinating how interconnected it all is, and it all comes from a single story that is a really obscure Magic story, but it's like one of the best ones to read
awesome.
to understand how Magic works there. Like, none of the people in that book actually cast spells, really, except for like the Fall of the Thrawn. It's all technology and science and war.
And these are coming from the Magic novels, right? So what if somebody wanted to start at the beginning of where you think it got good, what's the first one you'd recommend to get them hooked?
The Thrawn Empire, yeah, that's the one. There's a ton of great Magic lore. There's a bunch of like almost like fan fiction style Magic novels that came out in the early 90s that were meant to go kind of alongside the overall Magic theme, but you could kind of tell that they had just hired some artists and some authors to like just throw some stuff at the wall and see what sticks. But if you really want to know, it all comes down to Jeff Grubb, the progenitor for the Magic storyline, and pretty much all of then he passed away like a while ago, but at the onset, Magic the Gathering's art director was Jesper Meyerhoffs, and Jeff Grubb was their story designer. And I don't know to what extent his influence led us to have cards like Amulet of Krug, or Onulet. Su Chi is a really important card, for instance, in the Brothers War storyline, because it's the first automaton that they come across. But yeah, like there's a bunch of places you could start. You could even start. Actually, scratch that. There is a storyline that I haven't caught up on yet, or I haven't like finished finding all the books for. But the Madaran storyline, in which the Legends story happens, and the cards from the Legends set. I think it's a good place to start if you want to know the story of Nicol Bolas, because it's really, in Magic's context, it's where his story. It's not where his story starts. There's a bunch of great stuff for that with Ugin's storyline, his spirit brother. But Nicol Bolas's entire reign as the Madaran Emperor and his assassination by the Umezawa family is kind of what leads into a bunch of Kamigawa lore, bizarrely enough, because Umezawa shows up there. But if you read the Time Spiral storyline, when Nicol Bolas wakes up from his slumber, it's because Venser is on the plane, and Teferi and Venser and Rada and a couple other characters, Huayra I think is there. They're all just traveling around trying to figure out what happened after Teferi took Zelfir and phased it out of Dominaria, which is like still a plot that's resolving. Nicol Bolas hears Venser, tricks Venser into waking him up and breaking the seal on the temple that he's in. Looks around, is like, I'm going to kill you all, and then is so amused that Radha tries to attack him and that his magic doesn't work on her, that he decides he's not going to kill them all. But then he broadly announces that he's going to use this opportunity where time is a little bit unstable to travel back and forth in time and kill every single member of the Umezawa family in all of history. And he spends roughly the entire next book doing just that. And he shows up later in the Time Spiral storyline, like months later. He shows up and he's like smacking his hands together and he's like, all right, I'm done with that. What's next? Right as Lesserak, the Walker of Night shows. It's like it's a whole thing, but that's where the Nicol Bolas storyline starts with some of those early books from the 90s, and I'd be curious to reread them because I know that they're not really tethered or etched into the way that the stories are told now, and I have a suspicion that they've changed a few things from like character to character. But yeah, other than that, I would say actually the best place to start is definitely the Thrawn War, and then you go right from that into the Brothers' War. There's a handful of books that talk about what happened to Urza after he discovered. In fact, some of the books detail periods of thousands of years where like Urza has several failed invasion attempts on Phyrexia. I don't know if you knew that, but like he tries to go into Phyrexia several times to blow it up or do something, and he fails. But in one of them, he actually rescues a newt named Zantacha, and Zantacha shows up in card art like in Urza's saga. But the storyline that's associated with that is actually quite good as well, where you kind of get to see Urza as a mad scientist when he all of his friends are dead and he's just really bitter and trying to figure out how to get revenge on Phyrexia for killing his brother. At that point, he knows that's what happened. Like he knows his brother didn't actually betray him, that it was actually this other thing, and he kind of goes a little bit crazy doing it. And that,
I would say so.
Yeah.
All right, man. To go from one subject that you cannot get enough of to one that you probably couldn't get too little of. B, what is your preposterous peeve?
Yeah, so I've thought about this a lot, and there's things that are preposterous peeves where it's like, well, that's silly, and there's things that I can directly tie into my own sensory issues. As I've grown older, like I've come to realize that I actually grew up in a house that had people in it that had a lot of sensory issues that led them to have peeves that seemed ridiculous or outlandish. Like I was convinced for a long time that everyone hated the sound of styrofoam. And so I was like throwing styrofoam away, living in San Francisco at one point. My roommate's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm trying not to let it touch because I don't want to upset you." And then like, why would it do that? And it's like, yeah, well, for some people, touching styrofoam is exactly like nails on chalkboard, and for some people it isn't. And then I realized, oh, that explains my relationship with chewing, because I don't really have misophonia, but most of the people in my family do, which is this neurodivergent thing where you experience the sound of people chewing really close to your ears as actually quite painful. But because there's no localized part of the body to process that pain, it doesn't necessarily feel like pain. However, neurologically, it has the same effect of being under constant pain. And so what happens is the body starts to reject the notion that this is a good reality to be in, and you start acting really irrationally. And whenever I see anyone who's like disproportionately upset about something, I'm pretty sure I can trace it to a sensory issue that's being ignored. I don't really mind the chewing, but because my family for so long normalized chewing with your mouth closed and eating as quietly as possible, while I do that in public, I actually have noticed that when no one's around and I get to eat by myself, I sometimes I just like me eating noodles
Chomp
is
away.
like, oh my God, I make so much noise. But yeah, so then I thought, okay, well, what is it that actually I recognize that I have a disproportionate reaction to, that maybe I recognize that I'm having a disproportionate reaction to it while I'm having the disproportionate reaction, and yet I'm still powerless to have that reaction. And it's the sound of people singing off key. It's real. It's so bad. I start to see red and I want to kill. And it's not
doom
good.
The doom soundtrack starts playing.
Yeah. And unfortunately, most of the contexts where that actually happens are close friends singing along to favorite songs. So like I would be I'd be in the car with somebody and a song would come on and they'd start singing and they'd be so out of key. Mind you, I'm not even that great of a singer. Like I can't sing pitch perfect.
Yeah. You're not. Yeah, I get you.
But I struggle with making sounds like while singing that are dissonant because of how painful it is. And I didn't even realize that's what it was too. I just think I was in an improv class where the teacher's like, remember, like one of the most important talents to develop is the ability to sing badly on cue. Because it's almost impossible if you're if you're a good actor, then you can sing poorly on cue. You can sing bad, really bad, right away, and it's bad enough that people cringe. And if you're still learning how to act, you maybe can't. And I don't actually feel like that's entirely true anymore. I do feel like, yeah, I don't know. I kind of lost what I was thinking about for a second.
Something about the idea, is it because when you sing badly on cue that you know how to do it, and so therefore you can teach yourself effectively not how to do it by...
I think I'm automatically balancing it out in my brain, and then I end up making all the notes I'm trying to sound sour balance out and peter up to the right pitch, and it's all happening subconsciously as a defensive thing. A little bit like someone being unable to jump from the edge of a swimming pool diving board once they get up there. You know, it's like my body is just preventing me from making that sound because it's gonna hurt. Some something.
Yeah.
But recognizing that there's a level of irritation and inconvenience that starts to occupy myself, where I start to react to people around me, or especially the person who's the source of the sound, as if they are inconveniencing me in a big way. But they're not. You know, they're just singing harmlessly along to some like Coldplay lyrics or something.
Yeah. Has this peeve ever become a problem in your day-to-day life, or made life difficult in like unforeseen circumstances?
Not really. I mean, there's plenty of other things I do that have caused me much more difficulty than this particular one thing that I'm like kind of aware of. I'm certainly aware that it's probably made it harder for me to keep friends. Because
or at least ones that sing in style karaoke.
Ones that are tone deaf. I mean, I'm at least in a place now as an adult where I can have adult direct conversations about what I find to be, a sensory issue. And I still have lots of people in my life who actually have misophonia, so I'm still chewing very quietly when I'm around other people.
Can you, for those of us who are not as well read and experienced, what is misophonia?
Okay, yeah. So misophonia is a word used to describe a very specific kind of sensory sensitivity. In the case of misophonia, it's often it's hearing sounds of eating or chewing. And that you probably know someone or have met someone in your life who has mild to severe misophonia. And they're the person who is just suddenly very abrupt and rude about how you're chewing or eating your food. They might, suddenly very raised voice, excuse themselves from a room because there's chewing going on. They might start making eye rolls and all kinds of other nonverbal involuntary signals that they're experiencing extreme discomfort. But a lot of people don't know they have it. They just kind of, because it's hereditary, they might have been like myself, raised in an environment where it was just normal to, chew quietly. And that makes a lot of sense. It's a really polite thing to do. I was also, I think, gaslit as a kid into thinking that it was the 100% correct thing to do, when there's definitely entire cultural situations where slurping or eating is how you show that you're enjoying the food.
Yeah.
Like certainly I feel like I was presented with one reality, and then I would later find out that actually, not everyone is as sensitive to chewing sounds as my family led me to believe.
So do you have a story where your peeve of friends or other persons singing just ever so slightly off key or not quite right really shown the boldest?
Yeah, I mean, I think I snapped at Little Mike in the car one time. As a friend of mine. friend of ours actually. But I snapped at Little Mike one time while he was driving, and he was singing so poorly. And and I was like I had to yell stop. And I think that was when he really realized that like I might have a problem, with like the forcefulness, almost the emotionality of like, stop, where it's like, oh, I better stop. Sometimes you realize that someone like there might be more there, and maybe you're not going to get it. And I still don't know if I've been able to adequately articulate like why hearing dissonant notes causes me that feeling. All I know is that other people experience it for chalk and nails on chalkboard. Other people experience it for styrofoam. Plenty of people experience it for like people with really annoying sounds. Like I've seen someone have a full-on meltdown because someone wouldn't stop clicking their pen in a classroom. And like that, if you hear someone clicking a pen over and over again, and you're having a bad day, and you happen to have sensory issues, just watch the original Nutty Professor. It's like we're talking about suddenly feeling like every time someone clicks their nails or cracks their knuckles. That's a really popular one actually. And some of them are very normalized. It's very normal for people to be like, oh, don't trim your nails right there. Like don't crack your knuckles where I can hear you. And then and other people might be like, oh yeah, like I know that's a thing that's common, but like everyone's, I think, might have things that they're sensitive to, but without a localized place to feel the pain. They don't necessarily know it except for unexplained behavior that feels like a break in character.
And with that, we're going to head to our second ad break. But don't go anywhere, because when we get back, B is going to enter the lightning round.
Lightning round?
Hey, you. Yes, you. Yes, I'm talking to you. Have you ever wanted to record audio? Or perhaps fiddle with recorded audio? Maybe even record audio of a fiddle and then fiddle with said audio? Well, now you can with Audacity? With all the run-of-the-mill bells and whistles, you'll be confusing yourself with the tech in no time. But won't that cost lots of money? Because with my snow-blowing habit, I can only afford it. Ain't gonna cost shit. Audacity is free and easy enough to use that even a snow-blowing son of a gun can use it too. And we're back. B, are you ready to enter
the lightning round?
I'm still trying to figure out what that means, so yes.
All right, put however much time it takes to bake this cookie on the clock. B, is there a price for you to give up your passion forever?
Gosh. Which one? $1 million.
Make the food or do the dishes?
Make the food.
Did you ever cheat on a test in school?
Yes.
Would you rather have your inner monologue sound like Gilbert Gottfried or Fran Drescher?
It already sounds like Gilbert Gottfried. Next question.
Pineapple on pizza or fist fight?
I'm totally fine with pineapple on pizza. I don't know why people are so up in arms about that.
You're having the best day of your life. What happens next? Another amazing thing or something terrible?
Yeah, it's something terrible. It's an ebb and flow thing, but in packets of 3.
Is professional wrestling cool or lame?
Next question.
Nick Cage, best or worst ever?
Actually one of the best ever, but also one of the worst.
Are soups smoothies?
Wow. Yeah, they are.
Do you create your own thoughts or do you just listen to them?
I am an active member in the forum that decides predeterminately my thoughts. But also I have amnesia.
Would you rather there was no line at checkout or the fast food place always give you a large fry when you asked for a medium?
The large fry, please.
Cheese fries, an abomination or gift from God?
It's really between those two. A delightful treat. There's too many factors.
Album, shuffle, or playlist?
Shuffle.
Is there such a thing as a perfect piece of art?
No.
Have you ever had a crush on a cartoon character?
Yes.
Are you out of touch, or is it the children who are wrong?
Uh, I don't really want to joke about touching children, but the kids are all right.
Oh, Lord. What is more important, freedom or structure?
Oh, fuck. Freedom.
Communicate only in emojis or never text again.
Never text again.
Would you rather have tentacle arms or kangaroo legs?
Tentacle arms.
No internet ever again, or the internet streams directly into your brain at all times.
No internet ever again.
Would you rather be human in a world of Muppets or Muppet in a world of humans?
That's rough. Muppet. I already am a Muppet, damn it. I was once described as a Muppet to like the partner of a my girlfriend's parents' like partner. It's like, oh, and da da da, and this is B, who's essentially just a Muppet, and like I loved that description so well, and it took me years to register that it might have been an insult. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I loved it anyway, and I'm proudly self-declared Muppet.
Would you rather meet an extraterrestrial or a ghost?
I would rather meet an extraterrestrial, if only because I don't want to have to explain why I have not believed in ghosts to the ghost.
Muzak at all times that only you can hear, or a live studio audience that everyone can hear.
Does it have to be Muzak?
Yes.
Live audience.
Surf or turf?
Surf.
Would you rather have squeaky clown shoes for feet or a clown nose for a nose?
I guess I'm going with the nose.
Schrodinger's cat, alive, dead, or both?
It's definitely dead because you can't hear it.
Could you eat 37 of your favorite food for $5,000 in a 1 hour time limit?
37 of my favorite food?
Yes, sir.
I could.
Look, congratulations, you've survived the lightning round!
Oh.
Now, before you move on, I, like many listeners, would like to now know, what is your favorite food that you could eat 37 of in a 1 hour time limit for $5,000?
Tacos.
Respect. That's a lot of taco.
I actually I'm somewhat well known for my taco
Taking down
feats. Yeah. There was one booster draft that we did in the hills of Nevada somewhere, where we went and got Taco Bell afterwards, and I hadn't gotten Taco Bell since I was on a soccer team, so I was just used to a much higher caloric intake. And everyone ordered in the car, and then I ordered 2 taco party packs, which is essentially 24 tacos. And
Yeah.
I ate all of them but like 2, which I left in the fridge, and I ate that morning, like 5 hours later. We got very drunk. And that was part of why that was a decision that happened, and not a decision that I reflected on in any way for the days to come.
Well, as a reward for your conquering, my gallant guest, I grant the lightning round question of your own to be echoed until we get bored of it.
Oh, well, I did send one to you, and I believe it was our hot dogs tacos. True or false?
According to Merriam-Webster, yes.
That was my goblin. That was the goblin in me right there. It had a bet.
It meets the definition in word only. Obviously, flavor wise, it is not a taco, but it
Might as
is
well be.
technically a taco. What sayest thou?
I mean, I understand that the Jack in the Box tacos
Are basically hot dogs.
they're made with like vegan ingredients. Like, they're not even, it's not meat. It's like it's like meat flavored soybean curd.
Jeez.
they're delicious. They taste just like taco. Like, if you ever have a chance to compare a Jack in the Box taco and a Taco Bell taco, one
Okay,
is just a little
sure.
sweatier. You know, like there's
Yes.
but yeah. I think that a hot dog is definitely a kind of taco, but you know, a taco is just a word that has cultural.
A taco is just a word.
It's just a word, yeah. Like, sure, we prescribe a cultural significance to it because a taco is, you know, in Spanish still a taco, but it doesn't change into something else. Like, it's the word we get for it. So you think it's that way, but really, a taco does describe meat put into a pinching, you know, nap of like yeah, that's obvious. Like gyros are tacos technically, you know. It's just but when you say taco, because there's an association with a culture, you think taco like a Mexican taco or like
Sure.
but you know, like tacos. When you say taco in America, a lot of people think of the classic hard shell American taco, which is more of a Tex-Mex thing, and in no way a Mexican taco. Like cheese, no lettuce, not really. Like an actual taco, a real taco, it's just raw onions, a little bit of meat, some salsa, cilantro, and lime juice, and that's it. But it's gotten bastardized to have like refried beans in it and like a layer of cheese and like all this other stuff, which is fine. That's also a taco. It's just that when you say taco, I think of
just a bastard taco,
little street tacos. And when you know, you tell someone, any random person in California, you could get a variety of responses. The popularity of tapas style restaurants has really increased this weird, like, I'm gonna do this thing that's notoriously just the shittiest option, but people's favorite, and we're gonna put two of them on a bed of like so much shredded cabbage that you could barely. I'd eat other food there, and then we're gonna put some sort of mayo sauce on it. And it's gonna be like a pulled jackfruit, brown rice, and it's just all this shit. And then you're like, oh, this is $17 for like two of these. Like,
I guess I'll just go to Jack in the Box.
I would. Well, yeah, that's the thing, is that I'm in California, and we're just far enough south at this part in California where there's no shortage of some of the finest food trucks that are making some of the best Mexican food, high quality, almost on par with stuff you can get in Southern California, which if you've ever been to San Diego, you really can't find a bad restaurant there. But having just been in Ohio, I can attest that
you can find many a bad restaurant.
You can't find decent restaurants of certain. Like, I'm spoiled. Apparently I've had access to nothing but the
coastal
finest.
Cali, baby. Unbeaten.
Oh my gosh, fresh ingredients, a hard, like really hard to make flavor palettes that are consistently up and down the board, just so delicious. When I think of tacos, I think of little street tacos. And when some people think of tacos, they think of the more Tex-Mex taco. And I don't think when anyone thinks tacos, they're thinking hot dogs. But I do think that if it comes down to it, if you know, you could also call a taco a kind of hot dog, like in a way. It's just it's not quite as translatable. But purely linguistic definitions. It's funnily enough, it is the same thing.
So as we come to a close here, anything you want to plug, shout you'd like to give, places people can find you or your content?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram.com. And Killer Bee was taken, which sucks. Yeah, so I had to get creative because Killer Bee 1 was also taken. And it's Killer. And then there's 4 underscores, which I thought was a neat little nod to Abraham Lincoln's State of the Union address. That's the only way I remember it too. It's purely a mnemonic device where I'm like, why are there four scores? Well, four underscores. It's four underscores, and then B. Also there's currently a drafted website up for the game company that I'm working for, and I'm basically like an independent contractor, but they don't actually have any other analog digital artists combo work. So like I've done quite a few like little paintings and portraits, almost all the legwork concept wise, and they just put a website together where they actually have some of my artwork on display that's part of this project. And I think at a certain point we're going to use the website to help buoy some sort of Kickstarter or fundraising effort to get the amount of labor that we're going to need to like churn it out into like a Steam game or something like that. But I mean, I've just been working on this for years now.
Awesome.
And it's been a consistent little way that I pay rent. But also I've gotten to kind of design species from the bottom up and entire animal kingdoms based on like hybridizations and chimeric like structures. So it's like it's a fantasy game that has no recognizable fantasy species in it. Like there's no orcs or goblins. There is a species that's kind of like a cat, but they're a little bit like a palace cat or like a manole cat. So like the ones that have the really fluffy tails that and also have like round pupils that are they're more like the hobbits of the of the realms of Korg. But there's actually a web comic that's up there now that I wrote and designed all of the frames for, and I'm actually like last week I was working on a part 2 for it, just on a whim that we would continue to go that route. And so, and such time as the Kickstarter comes about, there could be more of that, and it's a fun way to kind of immerse into the world that I've been working on for a few years. Because I've signed an NDA. I can't really show a lot of the stuff I'm working on unless it's what they're putting on the public face or it's kind of already watermarked or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so while I rely on feedback to keep going, I also rely on positive validation to feel good about what I'm doing. And these meetings are so tight and condensed, oftentimes I don't get that. And so I'll occasionally bring someone over and be like, look at my art, and then I'm just watching their face while they take it all in, like, yes, good, feed me the power of your interest. And then they leave, and I'm like, oh, I just needed one person to be like, wow, this is really amazing. I'm like, yeah, thanks. I've been telling that to myself, but I'm alone, and and I mean, there's some truly cool things about what I'm working on. Like a lot of the analog things are the drawings are so small that I can fit almost 100 trees in the space that a quarter takes up on the page.
Sheesh.
But I'm drawing houses and cities to that level of detail, and the pages themselves are usually like 24 by 18 inches. So when blown up to scale, like a lot of them are just very they're very, very detailed and very cool to look at, and it's kind of it's a really good demonstration of what like an artist who's autistic can do when given time to hyper focus on very small sections of a map and just kind of use their own impetus to move along.
Well, if you would like, as we come to a close here, if you'd like one more compliment and one more kind of a little bit of validation, the story that you told, for those of you out there and for Be Yourself, the story that you told during the kind of main segment about the history of Dominaria and the Brothers' War and Yawgmoth and Mishra, that's the story that got me actually to kind of make this podcast.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, we were coming back from a tournament. This is 2000, probably 12. No. Couldn't have been 2012, sorry. It had to be like 2015, 2014, maybe, something like that. We were coming back from a tournament in San Jose, California, driving back to Santa Rosa, where the most of us lived in the car. Myself, Daniel Maybe, and Max Millickman are in the car. Both of which who have been guests on the podcast previously.
Oh, cool.
So I've got the whole gang in there.
The whole gang, the whole crew.
Yeah. So we're driving back, and not 10 minutes into the ride back, B launches into telling the story about how Mishra and whatever happened.
Yeah.
Nobody kind of yawned. Nobody rolled their eyes. Nobody looked around like, what the fuck is going on? Everybody was just so entranced by your tale for the next hour and 40 minutes on our ride back that it passed by in moments. And so for that gift at that time, and the gift that transcended forward in my interest in capturing and, chatting and contextualizing and making content out of those lovely experiences, I thank you, my friend.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Well, thank you, B, for finally being my guest today. And a special thanks to my editor, Richard Ashford, and my composer, Joshua Gibbons. And thank you. Yes, you listening at home, or wherever you find time to appreciate this. Time really is the most precious commodity we have, and I really appreciate you spending yours with us. And if you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, like, or just share it with a friend. Every little bit helps. or if you already have and are out of episodes to listen to, don't worry. We put out a new episode every Monday at midnight on SoundCloud, YouTube, Spotify, and iTunes at Passionate People and Preposterous Peeves Podcast. And a very special thanks are due to our patrons, Sabella Yellow. And if you'd like to join said illustrious ranks and have your name read aloud, just head on over to patreon.com/Passionate People and Preposterous Peeves Podcast. And remember, folks, if days are numbered and songs are sung, at the end of the day, I think we've all won. So please stick around, because great things have only just begun.